This is Dr. Ted Hildebrandt in his New Testament History, Literature, and Theology course, lecture number 9, finishing up the book of Matthew and beginning the introduction on the person of Mark.
All right, welcome back to New Testament History, Literature, and Theology course. This is the third presentation we're doing on the book of Matthew, and we will be finishing the story of Matthew today. Just to review a little bit where we've been, we talked about Matthew as being methodical. We talked about intertextual relationships between Matthew and Luke, gathering up what Luke scatters. Mark, we said Mark expands the miracles of Jesus and the works of Jesus, while Matthew expands the words of Jesus. And then we did a slight comparison between James and Matthew, for the Matthew is methodical and kind of an intertextual kind of relationship with Matthew. We talked about apostling and discipleship, the cost of discipleship. We talked about righteousness, obedience, those types of things, true and false disciples that is portrayed in the book of Matthew. And then we talked about the theology of Christ, his deity, his humanity, Christ as king in the book of Matthew, and the emphasis on the kingship of Christ and various things there with Christ. Then we talked about time, past, present, and future. We said Matthew was written most likely to a Jewish community, and so therefore he refers over 40 times to references to the Old Testament in all different types of contexts, fulfilling the Old Testament, but the fulfillments come in all sorts of ways, from a direct fulfillment to kind of an echo, where it's echoing through Scripture and it's echoed into the book of Matthew, and adumbrations, foreshadowings, various ways the Old Testament was fulfilled. That was the past. The present would be his 5 major discourses that we talked about: the Sermon on the Mount, the sending of the 12, the parables of the kingdom, the church discourses in chapter 18, and then the Olivet Discourse in chapters 24, 25 there. And then the future, we looked at the Olivet Discourse and the coming kingdom, and the already but not yet kind of thing, the here but there kind of thing coming with the future. Today what we want to look at is, to finish this up, and we're going to look at the Hebrew orientation of the book. We said it was written probably to Jewish folks, and so we want to say, what are the indications of who the audience is? And a lot of the books here, you'll see my general methodology is to work both with the author, and I know some New Testament people downplay the authorship thing, but I want to deal with the authors, especially when we get into the book of Mark, and then also ask about the audience, the author and the audience, and then what type of problems, what types of things sparked the writing of this gospel or this epistle between the author and that audience. And so we're going to say the Hebrew orientation to it. We're going to talk about, while it's Hebrew in orientation, there seems to be this non-Jewish aspect of it that is really pushed in the book of Matthew, and so we'll pick up that theme as well. And then the grand theme of the book of Matthew, beginning and end, the witness going out into all the world. We'll just mention that. And then style, just pick up some things in style. And then there's one thing that I want to pick up in terms of style, and we'll talk about that in terms of hyperbole and things like that later. But let's get on to it with the Hebrew, okay? We're trying to establish that the Hebrew background, or the Hebrew audience, Jewish audience of the book of Matthew. One of the things that we talked about before was this, what's called the gematria principle. And you have in the book of Matthew, you have the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And so you can see how it jumps from Jesus to David, who's about 1000 BC, to Abraham, who's about 2000 BC. So it goes Jesus Christ, the son of David, 1000 BC, son of Abraham, 2000 BC. And then with both David and Abraham, we have this great Davidic covenant where David is the king of Israel. And in 2 Samuel 7, there's this great promise that David and his descendants, David was the man after God's own heart, and that God said, David, I'm going to build you a house. And by that he meant he was going to build him a dynasty, and that one of David's descendants would sit on the throne of Israel forever. And that's 2 Samuel 7, when David was wanting to build the temple. And then with Abraham, you have the great Abrahamic covenant, and from many of you who know my Old Testament class, the land, the seed, that a seed would multiply, the promised land, the seed would multiply as the stars of heaven, and that he would be a blessing to all nations. And so what you see in the book of Matthew is this kind of breaking out, fulfilling of the Abrahamic covenant as the gospel spreads to all nations. So David and Abraham, key figures, that's how the book starts, both major Jewish players. Now the gematria in the genealogy of Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 1, it goes down 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 generations from David to the exile to Babylon in 586 BC. And then 14 generations from the carrying away into Babylon in exile up to Jesus. But when you actually look at that, and you look, I think it's at verse 8 of chapter 1, verse 8, you find that Matthew has actually skipped 3 of the kings of Judah in order, David, we've got a list of the kings of Judah in the book of Kings. We know who follows who. And so we've got a list of the kings, and we know that 3 of the names were skipped. If you go over to Chronicles and compare the parallel passage from Chronicles to that Matthew chapter 1, verse 8, 3 names are skipped. So he does that in order to make it work out to be 14. And we said in ancient times they used the alphabet as their number system, whereas in English we've got a separate alphabet and we've got a separate number system, 1, 2, 3, and we've got ABC, 2 different systems. They use their alphabet so that A would be 1, B would be 2, C would be 3, D would be 4. And if you do that in Hebrew, then it comes out to this, that this number 14 could well stand for DVD. D is the number 4, V is the number 6, D is the number 4. If you put those together, DVD is the number 14. And so it's been suggested through this gematria principle, working with numbers and letters, that Matthew is trying to say Jesus Christ, 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile, 14 from the exile to Jesus, that Jesus Christ is a son of David, Jesus Christ is a son of David, 14, 14, 14, working off that principle. So again, if you weren't Jewish, you wouldn't know the DVD. Now DVD, we said the Jews, at this time, they're not putting in the vowels. Vowels weren't pointed in, so you just have consonants, and so that's why it's DVD. Now, also in the book of Matthew, he does this Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? He has that in Aramaic, and that's present there as well. He uses the word behold a lot, which is the Hebrew word hine. It's used a lot. He also uses this prophecy fulfillment motif. We've looked at that already back when we were talking about time and we were talking about how Matthew quotes the Old Testament. You've got, for example, Matthew chapter 1. Jesus Christ is born of a virgin, a Parthenos. Mary is a virgin. Joseph is puzzling over what to do. And then it quotes that passage from Isaiah chapter 7. Behold, a virgin will conceive and bring forth a child. And so then you get this connection between what's going on in Isaiah chapter 7 with what's going on with Jesus and this virgin conceiving, and this connection between Isaiah. Bethlehem, that he would be born in Bethlehem of Judea. And so they go down into Bethlehem. There's no room for them in the place where they were staying, possibly with relatives in Bethlehem. So the prediction from Micah chapter 5, verse 2, I believe it is, Bethlehem, they go down into Egypt. And we said that was from Hosea 11. That was a little different, that out of Egypt I've called my son. And there you get Jesus as kind of a new Israel. And then we said also in the book of Matthew portrays Jesus as a kind of a new Moses. And so both of this new Israel thing, out of Egypt I have called my son, as Joseph and Mary go down into Egypt and as they come back, that those also are very connecting Jesus to Israel. Jesus is the new Israel. Jesus is the new Moses, and gives 5 discourses. So the use of Old Testament then is one of those indicators that it's a very Jewish connected book. Matthew 5:17, Jesus said, I did not come to destroy the law, the prophets, but to fulfill them. And so you get Jesus as kind of the climax, the fulfillment of the destiny of the law and the prophets, Jesus fulfilling it. Matthew chapter 5, another quote there. Now here's a couple interesting ones, I think, in terms of this Jewishness of it and the exclusiveness of the Jewish mission. When Jesus sends out the 12, in Matthew chapter 10, he sends out the disciples, and he gives the disciples explicit instructions, and this is what he says. And only Matthew contains these instructions. He says to the disciples as he sends them out in Matthew 10, verses 5 and following, he says, go nowhere among the Gentiles, and enter no town of the Samaritans. Jesus tells them, don't go to the Gentiles, don't go to the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And so Jesus tells his disciples when he's sending them out, no, you don't go out to all the world at this point. You go strictly to the house of Israel, not even to the Samaritans or the Gentiles. Focus on the lost sheep of Israel. So in one sense, Israel gets first dibs on the gospel message, comes first to them, and then we're going to see is a rejection largely from the Jewish community, and then after the rejection, then the gospel goes out to the Samaritans, to the world. So very interesting, exclusive statement there, only to the Jewish people when he sends out the 12. Another one that comes up here that's interesting is the Syrophoenician woman, or the Canaanite woman. And she comes to Jesus, and she's wanting Jesus to basically to heal her, and heal her daughter up in Syrophoenicia, up in Lebanon area, just north of Israel. And Jesus says to her, I was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel. I was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel. And basically, he said it's not right to take the children's food and to feed it to dogs. And the woman comes up and says, well, even the dogs eat from the food under the table. Even the dogs eat from the food under the table. This is from Matthew chapter 15, verse 24 in that area. So this woman comes back and said, Jesus says, wow, I haven't seen such faith in Israel and things. He says, go, your child's healed. And but Jesus first puts a little hesitancy there. I was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel. And then she responds that way. So you get these kind of exclusive Jewish statements, both with the Canaanite woman and with the sending of the 12, which would indicate a Jewish audience, as being highlighted here. Now,